Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Oxford Real Farming session. It's about the horticulture trial that Landworkers Alliance is running alongside Defra, and also about how horticulture can fit into the new environmental land management schemes that are being rolled out in England as a replacement to the BPS. Yeah, it's a really, really exciting topic, partly because it's been something that we've all been, working on for quite a long time. There was many criticisms of the BPS payments that were going out before, and one of them was that almost less than 1% of the payments went to the horticulture sector, even though the importance of fruit and veg is huge for diets. It's important for environmental sustainability, and it's also a sector that we really need to be supporting, because actually we import loads of our fruit and veg here into the UK. And so yeah, it was here at the Oxford Real Farming Conference maybe 5 years ago or more. I remember meeting with Michael Gove back when we were thinking about what's going to happen after Brexit and what could happen with the subsidies, and we brought that topic up at that time, saying actually very little subsidy goes to the horticulture sector. And we got some promises at that time that actually we'll really look at this subsidy system and we'll think about how we can reform it so that subsidy is distributed more fairly. And that's something that we've been working on ever since. And then of course, the whole agriculture bill and the Agriculture Act ensued, and then the long process for a rollover into a new subsidy support system, which is the environmental land management scheme. And it's been a really amazing journey to be involved in that, and had the brilliant support of the team at Defra in trying to make that happen. And Landworkers Alliance have been a part of that. And here's where we're going to introduce you to where this process has gone. Yeah, so great to have you with us. If you want to ask any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and there's plenty of time in this session to answer your questions. So do put them in the Q&A, and I'll make sure that somebody has an answer for you. Even if it's something unanswerable, we can just say we don't know. Anyway, so first I'm going to introduce you to Sam. Sam is somebody within Defra that I've been able to communicate quite a lot of these issues to, and has been amazing at working with us to try and take forward a lot of our concerns with how the ALMS is developing. So I'm going to pass you over to him so he can give an introduction to the environmental land management schemes and what's happening with them and how they're going to progress, so we can get where we want to with how the schemes support the sorts of farming that we want.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jyoti, and afternoon to everybody. It's really good to be here, and particularly to be under the banner of Landworkers Alliance. So thanks for having us. As Jyoti mentioned, I've got some slides for you, and I'm just going to give you sort of an overview of where we are, and obviously with sort of specific reference to the environmental land management team schemes and the development of these, but also the wider transition period that we're going through, to sort of reform the English agricultural policy, because I think it is quite important that we look at it as a holistic and a comprehensive set of changes that we're all going through, that we're all experiencing and we're working on, as opposed to just sort of focusing on the environmental land management schemes only. I've got a set of slides which I'm just going to attempt to start sharing with you. I do appreciate that some of you may well have seen some of these slides before and may well know some of this information. I hope if our communications teams have been doing a good job, all of you will have seen some of this information before, but I think hopefully it's for those of you that it is new to, it should be useful, and I think it's a useful refresher just to see where we are. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and hopefully this will work. So looks to me, as far as I can see, we are on with everybody. So I'll move on to just to give you an overview of what I'm going to run through. So I'm just going to give you some basic details about the transition and why we are where we are, and what we're going to do, the changes to the existing set of support payments, the direct payments, some details on our plans for environmental sustainable farming, and then the other schemes that will support all of this and provide part of that wider picture, and also just some details about our sort of our proposals for changing regulation and enforcement, which will be an important part of the environmental land management schemes and our other schemes that we're operating on. So to kick off, the agriculture transition, as we're now no longer part of the EU, and we've got an opportunity to really shape our agricultural policy to suit our needs, and we want to support our farmers and land managers in improving the environment, improving animal health and welfare, reducing carbon emissions, and enable them to store more carbon and support resilience to climate change risks, which we're all very much aware of, and also to make businesses more sustainable in a sort of a holistic way, including all of these. So the transition period that we're looking at is running from we're sort of in it, so from 2021 to 2027, and that's our transition, and that's the period that we're making the change. But obviously it won't all be completed within that time. I think our previous sort of policy was developed over almost 50 years, so I can see that this is a long journey, and this is the first part of that, but it's where we're going to be switching off the old and turning on the new. So I think one of the really sort of key messages I wanted to get out of today is that this is the start of a journey, and this is the first part. It's not the end, and it's not the only thing that will be happening. There will be lots going on. So and what we really want to do, it's going to be a change in tone and style, so a lot less top-down rule setting, and our aim is to reduce bureaucracy and strict enforcement of of things, and to be more collaborative, to be more flexible, to change things as required, and really work with our sort of end users and focus on the outcomes, focus on the things that we're trying to achieve together, as opposed to just what's ticking a box, and have we done exactly what we said we were going to do. And our principles is that we want to build things with you all, so to co-design things with the people that are going to use them or going to benefit from them, and to help you do the right things for your businesses, as well as for the environment and for the climate. And we know that we want to build trust. We know that that's quite a steep hill to climb, but we want to earn people's trust in our approach and the systems that we're bringing in. But to be fair and reasonable, to all sides, and to have in mind that that we'll be using public money for this, so it's got to be fair and reasonable for everybody, not just ourselves, or not just yourselves as the end users, but as I say, always with that focus on outcomes. So just looking at the sort of timescale for the sort of environmental schemes. So I think in November 2020, we published our first sort of considerable agricultural transition plan, and we updated that in June last year. I think we're moving a bit quickly. So these are our sort of our current plans. We've been running tests and trials since 2018, and hopefully a number of you present will be aware of those, because I know some of the LWA members have been involved in some specific tests and trials, but we've been working those, and they'll continue all the way through the transition period. We're going to continue to do tests and trials to sort of test different sections of policy, different sections of industry, and all the sort of different building blocks that come together. And I think as time goes on, those requirements will change, which is why we want to continue to do those. And then this year we're going to start, towards the end of last year, we had started to open the pilot for the Sustainable Farming Incentive, which is the first of our environmental land management schemes. And later on this year, we'll be rolling that scheme out, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then we've got our two other schemes, which, as you can see on the timescales there, will be sort of starting very shortly in terms of piloting and phase rollouts of those as well. Importantly, I think that whilst we're running all of these, the existing schemes, although we're going through this transition period, will still be there, and particularly countryside stewardship. Countryside stewardship and sustainable farming incentive will need to run in parallel. So we're looking at ways at how we can do that and how we can make that work. Countryside stewardship is still going to be available for new agreements sort of up until 2023 for new agreements starting in 2024. And we're looking at how we can simplify that process for people. We're looking at the rates that we pay, and I think we've recently published, as in yesterday, sort of plans for changes to those as well to bring them more in line. So that's definitely still there. That needs to be sort of definitely in the mind that that our existing schemes are a really important part of this transition. It's not just about going on to the new. One of the biggest changes is phasing out direct payments, as I'm sure lots of you will be aware, and this just gives you sort of an idea, a sort of bit of a snapshot of how we're looking to reduce those. And so you can see that by the sort of 2024, it's a considerable reduction in those payments, and that those funds will be going back into all of our other schemes and our other work that we're working on through the new schemes. And the government, our current government, is committed to provide that same sort of level of funding for the remaining sort of part of this Parliament. And so, which gives us good basis to work from in developing these new schemes, knowing where we are and the scope that we've got. The last payments, I think, will be for the 2027 scheme year, so that will be when the last of the payments are received from the old regime as such. So that's how we're sort of planning to do that. And then looking at our environmental land management, so the sort of the core cornerstone of our new approach, we're going to these schemes are there to reward farmers and land managers to deliver environmentally sustainable actions and other benefits, and really looking at the public goods of clean and plentiful water, clean air, protection and mitigation of our environmental hazards and adaptation to climate change, but also for thriving plants, wildlife, beauty, heritage and engagement. And I sincerely hope that you've all seen and are fully aware of the public goods that we are basing our policies on. And again, we're continuing to be committed to sort of designing these schemes with our sort of farmers and other associated people within the industry that all have a role to play in that. We've got the three schemes. So again, sustainable farming incentive is sort of the principles are based on simple actions that at scale will achieve large environmental outcome. And we will be, the scheme sort of groups these actions into packages based around sort of assets in on farms and farmland, such as land and soil and water courses or hedgerows. Our local nature recovery will be the sort of replacement for the countryside stewardship, but in a sort of a new and refreshed and more ambitious way. It's going to be looking at locally targeted environmental goals, things very specific to the area that you happen to be in, and also looking at encouraging collaboration between farmers and land managers to really boost the environmental outcomes that we can gain by working together and focusing that in a particular way. And then the landscape recovery is going to be a slightly more different scheme to the other two. It's going to be quite quite different in feel, when it's that real large scale, long term sort of land use change and the restoration of creation of new habitats, and that's may not suit everybody or every area, but definitely has a place within England. But as I say, will be quite different to the first two of the schemes that we've got. So the Sustainable Farming Incentive, I'm avoiding trying to say SFI as an acronym, but one or two may creep in. But Sustainable Farming Incentive, back in the beginning of December last year, we sort of published our update on this scheme and what we're hoping to achieve. Oops, sorry, we just moved on a bit quick. And we'll be publishing a bit more information well, we've just published more information on local nature recovery and landscape recovery. So there's more information about how those schemes are developing out now. And I've got some links which I'll put in the chat at the end of the session to just for ease of reference if you want to go and have a look. But as I've mentioned before, this scheme is really aimed at farmers, and we believe that it will, we can create significant environmental improvements and outcomes across England. And I think our aims are we believe it will be successful, and we can see at least 70% of farms and farmland in the scheme by the end of the transition period, so by 2028. And also that at whatever level farmers come in, that they'll increase their coverage and their levels of ambition over time. So as they get into the scheme, as they become more confident, as their business activities adjust and change, and as they see what their neighbours are doing or their peers are doing, or members of different groups, that they'll do more and more, and also it will sort of show that our outcomes are the ambitions that we have for this outcome. Sort of based approach within this can work. So having said all of that sort of big and long scale plans, what are we doing for 2022 for this year? So when we launch the scheme this year, we're going to launch it with 3 standards, and they will be oh, sorry, I think I've got a glitch in my scheme that moves me on. So we've got 3 standards: the arable and horticultural soils, the grassland soils, and a moorland and rough grazing introductory standard for land above the moorland line. I think one of our key sort of drivers in this is making sure that we can run this alongside existing schemes, so the countryside stewardship scheme. So we're sort of minimizing the overlap, and that's why we've one of the reasons that we've picked these, but also that these are key areas that the majority of farms have soils, and soil is fundamental to sort of environmental sustainability. So it's the obvious place to start, and that's why we've we've started with these, and at scale, although we're piloting a wider set of standards, when we're opening this up to all potential eligible farmers, that at scale we want to make sure that that it works, that we can learn from this. And so that's why we're starting with these 3 standards. Eligibility for the scheme next year will be farmers who are eligible for basic payment scheme. So that's not necessarily they don't necessarily need to be claiming in this year, but certainly eligible to be able to. And they also need to have management control of the land for the duration of the agreement. So the agreements will be 3 years, and so in order to sort of deliver the environmental outcomes that we need as part of the agreement, then you will need to have management control. But we are looking, and we have sort of looked quite carefully, and there's some guidance about those of you that are tenant farmers, and without the need for landlord consent, certainly at this stage, to enter into these agreements, as long as you check that your tenancy agreement allows you to do this. We've designed it in a specific way so that we can get as many people as possible taking part. And also, it's not at this stage, it's not a whole farm approach. So as a farmer, you can choose how many fields that you enter into the scheme, which will hopefully will give you the sort of confidence to enter and perhaps increase that over time, but also work around your own individual situations or circumstances in terms of what may be eligible now and what may be eligible in the future. And we're going to, I think the application window for this scheme will open later this year, and we'll make sure that there's a reasonable application period. Sort of, I think we're looking at around sort of 10 weeks to make sure people have got time to consider the scheme and what they can put it in there, and we'll try and keep that sort of separate to BPS claims, because obviously that's still ongoing and still quite a big part of the support network at the moment. So we don't want to sort of confuse things with that and do it all at the same time. So we're looking to sort of spread that and make sure that it's a different time. I think, you know, I think our longer term future is to be really flexible and allow people to enter the scheme at any time and have much more flexibility. But as a point to start, we'll have a specific window. As I mentioned, the agreement's going to be for 3 years, but we do want them to be flexible. And we're certainly looking that at least sort of within that 3 years, and this is sort of learning from some of our previous schemes, we want to make sure that there is some flexibility in there. So certainly at sort of 12-month points from their start, we would be looking to try and make the availability so you can put additional standards in there, or add more land to the agreements, or increase the ambition within the level within the standards that you apply. So if you've been doing it for a year and you think, yes, I can do this, and I think now I've got the confidence to go on, I'll increase the level. Obviously, you probably note from that that's all a sort of a positive increasing action. So it's not necessary that you won't be able to, that you won't be able to decrease, but I think our plan is to try and amend on a positive basis. But obviously there will be circumstances where farmers may need to reduce their coverage, and we would look at those on a case-by-case basis, and certainly in exceptional circumstances there would be a need. If there's a need, then the flexibility will be there within that scheme to do that. And then I think, so for how it works with countryside stewardship, so it's slightly more flexible. Our current plan is that land can be in both schemes. So I know that any of you that are involved in the pilot, we have said that land that's in an existing agri-environment scheme, such as countryside stewardship, can't be in the pilot. But for this wider rollout, land can be in both both countryside stewardship and SFI, as long as the actions that we're asking to do in either one are not contradictory, or don't give rise to double payment. But that's one of the reasons, as I mentioned before, why we were really careful about how we initially rolled the scheme out, because we're sort of working through how, as we progress through the transition, we can run these two in parallel and phase across. But it really is about what works best for the farmer, what your particular circumstances are. But our aim is to get people in and to be flexible with that as well. From a tenancy point of view, as I mentioned before, we're certainly saying that tenants with at least 2 years left on their tenancy can apply for the scheme. Land under license is probably likely to be more tricky, because you do need to have the management control and the ability to deliver the actions. But we are we're continuing to work with lots of stakeholders and different partners to make sure that we can be as inclusive and include as many people as possible. And we'll continue to do that. So there may well be more tweaks and changes over time as the scheme starts and rolls out, and we can work out how it will work and what will happen. So sorry, that's so I think I've just covered most of those things. I think just to say that at this present moment, land with less tenants, if you've got less than 2 years left on your tenancy for any particular land, I think our sort of current line is maybe not to enter that at this stage, because we can't guarantee that you've got the management control for the full period. But as I say, we are working on that and looking at how that can work in the future. Just to mention common land, because it's one that comes up quite a lot. So our plan is that common land will be eligible for the scheme, and through a group agreement basis. So that could be non-farming people, in addition to farming commoners. So there are landowners and non-grazers involved in that, and we want the group to come, to reach a consensus before applying as to how that will work for them. and how that will be divided, who will do the work, who takes responsibility, and come to us with that. And I think there's, in these sort of circumstances, there's lots of sort of examples of that, and we're working through how that will work, and how we can support that, and to the level that we can support that. But the sort of principle is that there must be a single entity for the common land that will act on behalf of the group, because it's not Defra's responsibility, to sort of form that entity, or work out those types of issues or disputes, or how that works. So a really important point is that we want to ensure that organic farmers can be part of the scheme. Certainly we want them to be take part in the early rollout, so that they can help with our learning as we develop and adjust this. And we feel as it stands that organic farmers are going to be very well placed to adopt the sort of high level of ambition in the soil standards. And that will be a continuing sort of phase as we roll out more and we expand the scheme further. And it's also worth noting that organic farmers can still join Countryside Stewardship Scheme in addition to the Sustainable Farming Incentive, subject to sort of the non-contradictory or double funding side. So it's definitely, organic farmers and farming practices have a place in this. And we want to make sure that that continues, and we're talking to lots of organic farmers and organisations, including yourselves, around that as we develop the schemes further. Okay, so I've just got these are sort of quite busy slides and a little bit of sort of detail, but this is just some information. I didn't want to sort of come without any information specifically about the standards within. So these are sort of a summary of the arable and horticultural soil standard, and we've got the grassland one, which my system has very helpfully just flicked onto. But just to give you an idea, these are the types of things that we are looking at, and the associated payment rates. So in the introductory level and the intermediate level, you'll see that it's about testing soil organic matter, undertaking the soil assessment, protecting your soils with a winter green cover. So we're looking at a considerable amount of cover, and in the intermediate level, we're just going further and requiring a bit more, so sort of multi-species as well as single species, or where you've got autumn sown crops that are going to be in place, or weedy stubbles in the introductory level. That's perfectly acceptable, but when we get into the intermediate, we want just a bit more ambition in that, so we're looking at other things. And the same for the addition of organic matter. So this gives you an idea of where we are starting from and what's in these standards. But as I say, it is our starting point, and it's our starting point, for a scheme that's going to be applicable all across England, all across the country. So it's pitching at the right level so that lots of people can enter. For the grassland standard, this is very similar. So as you can see, we've got a similar sort of basis, and then the change for or the difference to grasslands, we're looking at 95% green cover to protect the soil over the winter period, and then in the intermediate, we've got this additional sort of establish or maintain existing herbal lays to improve the soil health. There's different sort of root structures and depths and things to really to help that. So that's the summary. I could probably talk all day about the more finer details within that, but just to give you an idea. And we're also working, so for next year, we're looking at increasing on both of these a third level of ambition, a higher level of ambition as well. But we just want to get this out and get this started, and give us the time to make sure that we get that third level right. For the moorland and rough grazing, so this is a slightly different standard, and it will be about verifying, evaluating and identifying what's on the moorlands. And when we say moorland, for the purposes of this is land above the moorland line, but it will be getting us ready for undertaking sort of more practical environmental actions in the upper levels, in the intermediate and the advanced levels, which will follow in due course. But again, this is because lots of land above the water line is already in existing agri-environment schemes. It's getting that balance so that we can get people into these schemes whilst they're still in their existing schemes, but without doing too much that's a crossover or contradictory. So it's working at how we can fix that and start us off. So that's our sort of base requirement for this standard. And then moving on, another part of the Sustainable Farming Incentive 2022 scheme will be a annual health and welfare review. So this is a really important and a really new sort of concept within sort of traditional schemes, but it's a first step on the annual health and welfare pathway. And it's the design of this is to reduce endemic diseases and conditions within livestock and promote sort of responsible use of veterinary medicines, improve welfare, and sort of overall productivity. We know that lots of farmers already do this, and this is already in place. So for those that we do, that's good. This can fit in with that sort of existing practice, and we can provide the funding for that. And for those that haven't been able to adopt those sort of practices today, hopefully this will give them an opportunity to do so, so that we can get everybody onto a level playing field, and everybody improving our already very high welfare standards, but just making sure that we're supporting that opportunity for everybody to get together. Just moving on, and then so looking at the future, as we develop the scheme, as the scheme becomes more established, we're looking at introducing more standards into the scheme, and this is our sort of current plan to move forward. So next year we're looking at introducing integrated pest management, nutrient management, and hedgerows. 2024 we've got agroforestry, and others, and 2025 we're looking at a specific organic standard on-farm woodland, and of special interest is the orchards and specialist horticultural standard as well. So those are when we're looking, that's our sort of current view of when we're trying to get them into the scheme. But obviously between now and then we'll be working on building those and making sure that they're ready to come into the scheme in that time. So it's not, it will be an ongoing process from now, as opposed to something that we're thinking about way in the future. So that was sort of the details of that scheme and our plans for that. As I mentioned right at the start, we have got a much wider program going on. So we've got a number of other schemes that are sort of being launched, being developed, being changed. The Farming Investment Fund, the Resilience Fund, our innovation program, Farming and Protected Landscapes, and our Tree Health scheme. And it is important that when we look at the reducing BPS payments and the funding that's going into the agricultural program, that we consider all of these as well as the environmental land management schemes, because they're all forming part of our future offer. So I'll run through these quickly. The Farming Investment Scheme, so we've got two different grant options through there. The Farming Equipment and Technology Fund, which is the smaller fund for, I think it's £2,000 to £25,000 investments. And we've got a deadline looming of later today, or it might have just passed, for this current round. There will be future rounds, but the current round. And then we've got a larger, the Farming Transformation Fund, which is working along sort of different themes, and the current one is water management. Again, we've got a slightly later, this is a two-part process. So we've got an initial application to look at eligibility and likely, and then we sort of invite to a full application. So our current initial application is running till the 12th of January, and then full applications are due in at the end of June. But as I say, again, this will be a sort of a continued cycle that will continue into the future. That's our sort of our current work, and similar to the environmental schemes, these are the start of these, and we are already sort of learning and changing and tweaking, based on the feedback and how these applications have been going for these, so that we can improve them for the future. We've got the Resilience Fund, which the Land Workers Alliance are one of our organisations that are supporting farmers that are part of this and supporting farmers and land managers to help them to plan for the future. So it's to start those conversations, to signpost to what is coming up and how it's coming up, and to give sort of business advice and support, at least through the main part of the transition. And we're working really hard with our organisation. We're very grateful to all of those that have taken part and that are talking to people and running seminars and drop-in sessions and helping people sort of plan and look at how they're going to approach their businesses in the future. So that's continuing. And then we've got the innovation programs, which is looking at transforming productivity and enhancing sustainability. So we've got the 3 funds that we're working through with those as well, and they're obviously going to will sort of tie in with our our new schemes as well, to look at research and development and how we get closer towards net zero, and how we can bring in resilience and efficiency into our industry. Farming and protected landscapes. So this is another one of our sort of interim schemes at the moment, and it will be open to farmers and land managers that are in protected landscapes. So those are areas of outstanding natural beauty, national parks, Norfolk Broads, and they will be they're sort of one-off projects, as opposed to sort of a long continual sort of project looking at nature recovery, climate change, and looking at cultural heritage and landscape, and nature-friendly sustainable farm business working. So they're really important, and they're providing sort of additional support in those protected areas where there are different pressures and additional pressures as well, and obviously we'll be learning from those projects that are undertaken through this as to how we continue that support going forward. And the tree health scheme, which is massively important. The pilot was launched. The pilot of this was launched last year, and we've got the full scheme planning to launch currently in 2024. And this will be looking at how we're supporting the management so for sort of felling treatment, restocking of trees that are diseased, and so how we can ensure that we maintain and we manage a healthy population of trees within England. And that's a really important part, and we're working particularly with the Forestry Commission, one of our arm's length bodies, on this as well. And so the existing incentives will continue to be available, certainly through the early stages of the transition for woodland creation. So we've got our creation planning grant that's already running, those options through countryside stewardship, the carbon fund, the HS2 woodland fund, and our woodland carbon guarantee. So there's a lot of activity going on in those areas, in addition to what we're looking to include within the environmental land management schemes as well. I'm almost there. So just to sort of emphasize again that we will sort of throughout the transition, we're working to reform our policies, but we're also looking to reform our regulation enforcement. We want it to be more simple. We want it to be more proportionate, more supportive, and enable farmers to look at where they can improve, or if they're not currently meeting the elements of the agreements that they need to, how we can do that, how we can prioritize and make that better for people, and how we use the evidence to support what's going on. So we really want it to be a much more partnership approach, and as opposed to how it's been in the past, and we're continuing to sort of work with partners to make that. And then just a point which I'm sure again lots of you are aware of, that we're undertaking lots of stakeholder workshops. we'd like people to be involved in co-design. So I've got some details here of how you can get involved in our co-design. We've got our e-alert and blogs that keep people up to date with what's going on. And obviously feeding in through organisations is a really important and really useful way, such as Land Workers Alliance, to help shape the policy and the policy development for the future. So I'm going to stop sharing ASAP because I've talked on for a long time, but I'm hoping that I appreciate that's quite broad, and has covered quite a lot, but it gives you an idea of where we are and our sort of overall approach and what we're trying to achieve working with you all. So Jyoti, I'm ready for some questions if there are a few around.
Thank you very, very much, Sam. We might move on to Rebecca and Pete's presentation and then do all the questions at the end. Is that okay? Do you have time for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe be prepared. There's someone's trying to ask about how this fits more specifically into horticulture, and some about what the minimum acreage is, and about the below 5 hectare threshold and where that might be going. So you can prepare yourself. Okay. Yes, now we'll move on to Rebecca to talk very specifically about what we've been working with you with to try and develop more options for supporting horticulture. Over to you, Rebecca.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to just share my screen and then talk to you about the Growing Goods test and trial, which the Land Workers Alliance have been running over the last 15 months. So Land Workers Alliance, when we heard that there was going to be a co-design process for the environmental land management scheme, we were eager to get involved and put in a couple of applications for a horticulture trial and also an agroecology trial, which we folded in. Well, Defra asked us to fold in together to create one trial, and we called this trial Growing Goods. And I'll just give you a quick overview of what it involved, because it ran from 15 months, from July 2020 to just end of October 2021, and had multiple different stages, including working with 20 growers in summer 2020 to co-design, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, then testing the elements that we'd co-designed, exploring different ways of giving advice and sharing knowledge, before moving on to testing a land management plan design and doing some interviews and farm visits, and finally developing a payment mechanism. So the co-design phase, we worked with 20 growers, and throughout this trial we've been looking not just at the typical Land Workers Alliance scale growers, so not just small growers, but we've been working with really large scale orchards, field scale veg, glass houses, and you'll see some pictures later on in my slideshow just to show the diversity of different growers that we've been working with. And because of COVID, we had to do the whole co-design on Zoom, but it actually worked surprisingly well. We were working with 2 other agencies, SWAG Southwest and the Land App, which is the Land App is a GIS mapping tool, which is being increasingly used by land agents, and I think in several other Defra tests and trials, and part of the co-design was to develop a set of codes. UK-HAB is a set of codes which is being designed to be universally applicable across the UK. So bringing together various other ways of classifying land use into one universal way, and consists of primary codes which signify the actual land use, and secondary codes which signify the management of the land in that land use. And part of the co-design was to design some codes which are appropriate for horticulture. So we had to find out exactly what habitats the growers had on their land, and then how they're managing those habitats, including productive habitats, not just habitat purely for conservation. We also covered thorny issues and blue sky thinking in one of the workshops. So thorny issues including tenancies, which anyone in the audience who is a large-scale field veg grower will know that typically tenancies are just 1 year long. And from listening to Sam's presentation, we'll have gathered that that means at the moment it's not possible to go into the SFI because you have to have longer than 2 years of control of the land. So we've been looking a bit at that. And then issues such as dealing with scale was another thing, and diversity. And the end result of the co-design was that we came up with 2 methods for auditing the public goods actions that growers deliver on their land, one of which is a checklist, just a really simple list which you can go down and tick what you do and ignore what you don't. And then secondly, the land app maps, whereby the participants were able to map onto their holding the different public goods that they are doing so that you could see them visually at a glance. So this slide just shows the arable and horticulture section of the UK HAB classification, and all the boxes in yellow are the ones that we've added as a result of this trial. So previously the only bit for orchards was commercial intensive orchards, and we've created more categories. So there's a modern low intensity, and then traditional orchards. And then we've divided horticulture into annuals and biennials, perennials and polycultures, and then a number of subdivisions of that. Excuse me for skipping quite quickly through it all, but I'm keen that we'll get the chance for questions at the end. So come September 2020, we moved into the main trial, and we had to recruit another 40 different growers to the ones who were in the co-design, because we were wanting to test the checklist and the land app mapping process with a fresh group who hadn't been involved in the co-design. So we had 40 different people who had about a month to learn the skill of using the land app, and half of them did that, and half of them tested the checklist, and about 5 or 6 tested both out of choice. And learning how to use the land app was somewhat involved, and we offered some of them quite detailed support, and the other half of the trial we asked to try and do it on their own, just to assess how difficult or easy it was to actually use the land app and how much support was necessary. And we used the new UK HAB classification codes. And the verdict from that part of the trial was that while the checklist was much easier and quicker, most people who tried the land app really felt that it was worth the effort of learning how to use it, because it was so much more accurate, because you can show the areas of what you're doing rather than just saying whether you're doing them or not. And a lot of the people in the trial actually really liked the land app as a tool, and have said subsequently that they've been using it for other aspects of their land management planning. So in the autumn of 2020, we also were looking at ways for sharing knowledge. And an aspect of our initial proposal that Defra were really keen that we explored was comparing peer-to-peer learning with more traditional expert-led workshops. So we had 2 sets of workshops just to try the 2 ways of working with different topics. One set of workshops was looking at public engagement, and the other was looking at adaptation and mitigation of climate change, adaptation to and mitigation of climate change. And the aim of these workshops, which sadly, again, had to all happen on Zoom, some of them were meant to be site visits, but the aim was to raise the environmental ambition for when all the participants did their land management plans, and to really give them ideas. So the peer-to-peer workshops consisted of structured discussions between groups of growers, and the expert-led ones were, as you'd imagine, one or two experts talking about their farms, what they do on their farms, and with a chance for question and answer. And we also made a couple of short films about climate change mitigation and adaptation measures and public engagement, which we used as part of the expert-led workshops. Unfortunately, because of the size of the sample in the trial, I think that the peer-to-peer aspect didn't work as well as it might have done, because there weren't enough similar growers to share practices. I think if there'd been a much bigger sample size with lots of field scale veg growers and lots of orchard tree crop growers, there'd have been much more potential for really valuable knowledge exchange. But because of the diversity of scales, horticultural types, it was a bit more limited, the useful knowledge that could be exchanged. But certainly the people in the peer-to-peer seemed to really enjoy them. But there was a sense that people would still want to have some expert advice as well as just having peer-to-peer. So come this time last year, we started on the land management plan phase. And the idea with this was to use a table which was based on a spreadsheet and based on a traditional style of land management plan, where you say, talk about the parcel of land, what you're going to do there, and when you're going to do it. And then also half of the sample mapped on their Land Act maps the actions that they're already doing, the ongoing actions. These were marked in yellow, and the new actions were marked in green. And in a minute, I'll show you a sample map. So by this stage, we'd had a few people dropped out of the trial, but still we had 33 land management plans submitted and 15 maps were completed. And while people were creating their land management plans, we also were offering support, again comparing peer-to-peer support, where people were able to meet in a Zoom group to troubleshoot with each other and share ideas, with the other half of the sample being offered one-to-one expert advice sessions. And generally, I think, again, because the peer-to-peer ones were pretty much left to just choose what they wanted to talk about, they weren't so structured. And because of the diversity of different people, people didn't find these so useful. But I think there's a lot more potential to do it. And I'm particularly mindful of one participant who said that she would really enjoy doing this with other growers across the country, because it would mean she wasn't sharing knowledge with people in her own area who she might be competing with, but she'd be sharing much more widely. And also in this phase, we introduced the idea of payment options and did a questionnaire to find out which payment options people liked best, including a variation on the Sustainable Farming Incentive Standard, which was a points-based standard, which at this stage of the trial proved to be the most popular payment method. And it was interesting that when we moved on to developing payment methods, actually universally all the panel decided they really didn't like this method because it was too risky, that they get a fixed amount of money for doing a variable set of things for which the cost couldn't really be predicted. So this is an example of a Land Act map, and this is for a vineyard, and you can see on here that there's the yellow is where they're managing a meadow around the vineyard planting to maintain the wildflower diversity. A new action is in the hedges. They were going to install nest boxes and bat boxes. And then this green block here is a planting of Pinot Noir grapes, which are very susceptible to downy mildew. And they were proposing to replace with a more disease-resistant variety of grape as part of their elm agreement. So this is the kind of thing that each of the people who produced a Land Act map produced, and we're hoping that we can go on and try and do some tests with groups of farmers in an area who are collaborating. And this is where I think that the Land Act will really come into its own, where you start to see actions building up over a landscape, which will really start to show what could be done to help nature recover. So now we get on to one of the aspects of the trial that I've most enjoyed, which is the interviews and farm visits. And thankfully, by May last year, we were actually able to get out and visit some farms. We did 10 Zoom interviews and then 10 interviews actually on farm visits, and went to a diverse range of different holdings. And I was really particularly keen to find out in these interviews what environmental weaknesses the growers perceived that they had, and how they felt like they needed help in overcoming them, what the barriers were that they needed help from elm to overcome. And I'll go on to that in a couple of slides' time. But the other really interesting thing that I was not expecting to come out so strongly from the interviews was the role of the supply chain in either driving negative practices or supporting positive ones. So we had actually set up the trial so that two of the groups of growers were groups who were supplying an organic box scheme. So one group was based on the Growing Communities organic box scheme and the food zones, so the urban, peri-urban and rural suppliers to the Growing Communities box scheme in Hackney in London. And then the other group were Regather Sheffield, and a group of about 6 growers that are supplying the Regather Sheffield organic box scheme. And the growers supplying these two really were feeling very supported in delivering the public goods that they're delivering. And in a sense, that's not so surprising, because the customers for an organic box scheme are buying because it's organic and because it's delivering public goods. What was really striking to me was that the larger scale growers were saying they really wanted to change things like pesticide use and compaction of soil and use of peat in growing media. But at the moment, because of things like the contracts they were tied into with supermarkets, or the cosmetic demands with supermarkets, or not just supermarkets, but other industrial supply chains, they were feeling very much pushed into using these things, and they needed help to change their practices, but also their margins were just so narrow that they didn't have much scope for investing in environmental improvements in the current economic system. So it was clear to me by the end of the trial that that really we need to be changing the way the supply chains work to come in line with elm, and that will really amplify the impact of elm. And so we can't just see elm as investment in sustainable farming in isolation, but we've really got to be changing the supply chain to support these changes. So these pictures just show a snapshot of the varying scales that we were visiting. There was one farm or glass house operation that had 3 glass houses, like the one in the top left, and a robotic planter. So you can see it's a vast scale of producing herbs for supermarkets, but they had an enormous amount of conservation measures around the outside of the glass houses, and they were really keen to show me on the site visit where they've been creating habitat for water voles, and where they've got a butterfly walk along the side of one of the glass houses. So even though it may look very industrial inside the glass house, they're also really keen to be making the changes to make their operation more sustainable. On the other end of the scale, there was an agroforestry farm and small-scale market garden and a biodynamic vineyard. So this table just gives a snapshot of some of the environmental weaknesses that the growers themselves identified and the ways in which the ELM scheme could help. So, for example, for use of pesticides, payments that would encourage innovation would be really helpful, and particularly removing the risks associated with failure. With these narrow margins, it's just so hard to afford to take any risk. I won't read the whole table out, but I'll give you a minute or two to read through it. So just analysing some of the barriers, most of the barriers to overcoming these weaknesses fell into the categories of lack of capital, lack of time, or lack of skill, and then the risk of innovation. For example, it would risk losing the crop or reduced cosmetic appearance or loss of margin. And then, as I mentioned before, supply chain pressure. And it was clear that ELM could really help with all of these except the last. And I think it's up to us to be also putting pressure on supermarkets and other supply chains to be able to support producers in making these changes. And we really need to be changing awareness right the way through the supply chain of what farmers and growers need support with in changing their practices. So this final phase, the payment, design and testing phase, was also really fascinating because it reached to the nub of the issue. The way we did this was to recruit 6 growers representing 6 of the main types of horticulture. And with those 6 growers, we really tried to thrash out 2 or 3 methods, payment methods, that we would then test with 2 more groups of 15 to 20 growers. Interestingly, as I mentioned earlier, the 6 growers rejected the points-based standards straight away. And one of the growers on the panel actually produced this very useful payment formula spreadsheet, which basically looked at, am I running out of time, Jyoti? Yeah, okay, I've not got that much more to go. So the payment formula spreadsheet put the payments into a formula of the quantity of the good, the payment rate for the good, and then a multiplier according to whether it would be the full cost, less than the cost, or more than the cost of delivery. And from this, we evolved the idea of a catalogue, which I'll talk about in a minute. The catalogue was comprised of about 30 or 40 public goods actions, which a grower could choose to put on their land management plan. And then we tested this with 33 growers. And they were really, really positive about this growing the goods catalogue. And some of the feedback, particularly the last comment, really pleased me, was that they said it was easier than countryside stewardship and DPS to use. Also, for people to be saying it was exciting and user-friendly was pretty good to hear as well. So I don't think there'll be time to demonstrate to you the growing goods catalogue here, but I'll just talk you through it. The concept was to make it as easy as internet shopping by basically explaining what you'd have to do for each public goods action, what the payment rate would be for it, and what the criteria are for getting the payment. And then you'd look through the catalogue and you'd click on add to land management plan. This is in the ideal end product. We haven't quite managed to do it so automatically yet. So at the moment, you have to manually enter a code into your land management plan. But then it auto fills your land management plan, and all you need to do as the applicant is put the number of units of the action to be delivered, the location, and whether it's a new or an ongoing action. So this, I'm not expecting you to read it all, but this gives a sort of snapshot of what the land management plan looks like. And we were really, really pleased that Defra have decided to include this design of land management plan template in the SFI pilot trial with alongside another form of land management plan for the pilot participants to try out. So it's exciting that some elements have been seen to be good. So just to conclude, this is really important. The message that came through time and time again is that horticulture is different to broadacre agriculture. So it really needs a slightly different approach with elm. It's not only more diverse in that you've got anything from glass houses and tree crops to field scale veg and small scale market gardens, peri-urban horticulture. But it's also, it can be really intensive. Even field scale veg is more intensive than a lot of grassland and arable farming. But horticulture, even though it's not traditionally been a recipient of agri-environment schemes, has many, many environmental issues that it's facing, ranging from peat to pesticide use. And it really does need help in addressing these issues. The growers seem to be really enthusiastic about the Growing the Goods catalogue and the land management plans, and also mapping using the Land app. So we feel that we're really on to something, but there is a bit more work to be done on this. We think it's really important to incorporate existing certification and accreditation schemes such as organic certification and leaf mark. And finally, the challenge, which we feel that we did manage to do with Growing the Goods catalogue, is to keep it simple, but also to deal with the complexity of horticulture. But we do need to make sure that it's sufficiently resourced. So I will hand over to Pete, who was one of our test and trial participants, and I hope he'll be able to give you a bit of an insight from the grower's perspective. So over to you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Rebecca. We're going to move straight on to Pete, which I mistakenly called Fit and Fresh earlier. Got a lot to live up to.
I thought I might have got away without you repeating that, Jay. I'm aware that you've probably all been sat fidgeting in your chairs for a while now, so I'll try and crack on fairly quickly and not repeat what other people have said, and keep it fairly horticultural. So we are third generation family business. We're in the northeast tip of Essex, so up on the Tendring Peninsula, with the sea just to the north of us in the shape of the Stour Estuary, to the east and to the south as well. We farm about 600 acres, 50-50 owned and rented, and we predominantly grow field veg for the food service sector. We did have some intensive apple and pear orchards, but we abandoned those last year and this year. And with that, our juice business was also disposed of at the same time. We did keep our spirits business, though. I can't think why, but we thought we'd hang on to that one. We farm on a silty loam, grade 1 or 2 soils, and there's London clay underneath, as we're part of the old Thames Basin. And we have a couple of innovation partnerships, one with the Fresca Group and one with Bellazoo, who's now part of the William Jackson Food Group. And there we're looking at mitigation of and adaptation to climate change. So fairly relevant to what we're talking about today, which is elms. So I thought I'd just sort of focus really on the context, and that is the B word. we're still harvesting what has been sown in that respect. It's not over yet, as we all know. Overriding environment we find ourselves in is of a biodiversity and carbon crisis, thanks to climate change. And on top of that, we've had to cope with the pandemic over the last couple of years. Into the mix now, you throw the labour crisis, I suppose, is another one to affect our industry in particular. And obviously we've had the rampant cost inflation of the last year. We look at this as growers in the scope of price deflation or price stagnation. We had a lovely phone call just before Christmas from a leading retailer to inform us that they'd be happy to give us a program for rhubarb again next year. It just needed a small decrease in price of 4.5%. I'm not quite sure where they've been recently. Maybe they've had COVID and not heard about cost increases, but I'm still wondering how I will stand my ground with them, as George Eustace has advised, and quite how I'll tell them what to do with their rhubarb. With that context, I think in horticulture in particular, we really have to look and consider the pace of change at the moment, driven by those bigger issues. And there's some really sort of quite scary examples. There is over 20% less brassicas forecast to be grown in Lincolnshire this year. There's over 20% less strawberry plants ordered in the UK for 2022. And at the same time, we have a get out of jail free card this year. I don't know if the sort of HMRC have decided how it will be taxed, but growers and farmers can pack it all in, stop farming, and get the rest of their basic payments in one hit. And that, allied by consistent high land prices, you would think it might be quite an attractive time to jump ship, dare I say it. And then we look at it as well, we look at it in the context of the weather changes, the extreme weather, the heat and drought in the summer, the violent storms in the winter. We have weather records here going back into the 40s, and it's very clear pattern. And as growers and farmers, we're on the front line. We all know what's happening. We can all see it. We all feel it every day of the year, probably. We have the loss of labour, particularly bad for horticulture last year. We're a smaller grower, so it's not too bad, but we can see it coming down the line. The spiralling costs. And then at the same time, we have a government, retail and food service sector who are focused on cheap food. When we look at some of our innovation projects, again and again, we hear about price and we hear about convenience. And those two things don't necessarily tap in with some of the other wider issues we've got to cope with. Simultaneously, while we have a consumer that is keen to express their support for food and farming, that consumer is increasingly disconnected with food and nature. And I think horticulture and agriculture and food production have got quite a role to play in trying to reconnect them so they can understand what we're doing, what needs to be done, and how we can cope with some of these changes. Okay, so SFI. Well, we meet the 5 hectare rule, so we're okay for now. Not sure about other smallholders. Introductory level of 70% cover in winter. Autumn sown spring onions don't make much ground cover. And as vegetable growers, we're constantly clearing crops every day of the year. So that might be an issue. Organic matter, well, with our brassicas, actually, the way we crop, we do put a lot of organic matter back into the ground. But in recent years, we've started including cover crops and lays. And while we are not positioned to have livestock again here, we were bringing in farmyard manure, which is great because it brings all the microfauna, the bacteria and the other little critters that we need for a healthy soil. But now, obviously, farmyard manure is being withdrawn again as an option. £22 a hectare. Sounds all right, sounds nice. And then you look at it at an hourly wage cost of someone doing the work. That doesn't really go that far. If we then look at the intermediate level, I don't know if we can even consider it if we can't meet, say, the 70% ground cover of introductory level. And again, 40% per hectare. It's going to be a tall order for some of us field veg growers, I think. I just want to quickly fly back. We saw on Sam's presentation earlier the Defra timeline, and I read it and I think, oh yeah, there's all things that we are doing, things that we want to do. And then right at the bottom, it has orchards and specialist horticulture. And it does seem at times that horticulture has just been bolted on at the end, same with SFI as well. So we see this, but we see no detail. And as we all know, the devil is in the detail. So what are we doing here at the farm that sort of covers growing the goods and the catalogue that Rebecca has already talked about in quite some detail? We have lots of conservation work. We always have done. We run our 5 reservoirs in the surrounding areas as, if you like, on-farm nature reserves with considered planting around them as well. We have rewilding in terms of natural regeneration schemes, tree planting every winter. We've done wetland creation and some hedgerow planting. And these are all things that hopefully we'll see supported in the transfer from countryside stewardship. Now, public access and public goods was mentioned as well. And I think in horticulture, we have a real advantage here in the fact that so many of us produce crops which are instantly recognizable to a lot of consumers. The apple they pick from the tree, they can eat there and then, and they know it's an apple. The spring onion they pull from the ground, they could stick in a cheese sandwich there and then. It is obviously what it is. And that's compared to, say, someone growing sugar beet or wheat, which has to go off and be processed into something that looks completely different, or meat, for dare I say it, that has to change from a pig into something shrink wrapped on the supermarket shelf. And so we have a lot of public access here. We have a lot of access all around the farm for walkers and horse riders. We have done quite a bit of work on public engagement. So we have the local school, Cub Scouts, and older groups of people as well who come and walk and learn a little bit. And last year we converted an old building into a visitor centre, both to have somewhere warm and dry for the kids to come back to and go to the toilet in, and for other groups to come and taste products and look at what we're doing. We've also recently got into woodland carbon. So we've just completed a UCO, English Woodland Carbon opportunity, can't remember which, 13 hectare carbon planting block, which has been a learning experience, shall we say. And we have plans for, well, I call it hortiforestry project, which should kick off next year. Or with planting actually this winter, soon to follow. We also have some extensive orchards on the farm, which we are keeping going. So I spoke earlier about abandoning the apples and pears. We've got now a fig project, a citrus project, and an olive project. And the olives and figs are certainly extensive orchards, whereas the citrus has a little more protection. But these are all goods and things I think should be on that catalogue and could be on that catalogue. But it also shows why, when we're doing things like this, it's much easier to have that map-based way of reporting it, because there's so much going on in those different environments. If you just think in an extensive orchard or especially hortiforestry, where you have multiple things going on in the field, you could have the timber crop down the middle and the wood and the nut crop eligible for carbon, perennial crops eligible for carbon potentially in the future, biodiversity, these all have to be included. And that is why it's pleasing to hear Defra saying that, oh yeah, we're going to allow private investment and we're going to allow stacking, financial stacking, that is, not a straw bale stacking. So can you spot the difference? We have what we're doing now, the complexity. We have the growing goods catalogue, which is, I think, about 39 subsections within it. And growers and farmers that are doers. We tend to like doing stuff rather than talking, and so these actions have been happening on the ground already. Yet we left the EU in 2021. Brexit was as long ago as 2016. Amazingly, the climate crisis is now, inflation is now, labour shortage is now, and I've mentioned NUCO, but there are other opportunities of things to do now. And what have we got today? We've got SFI. We had a little bit of flannel from George Eustace yesterday. Whether it's particularly relevant to horticulture or not is unknown. Local nature recovery is going to be a continuation of countryside stewardship. The wider landscape nature recovery is really going to be more, I would have thought, applicable to institutional, aristocratic and corporate landowners. And that's going to have, I understand, a third of the budget going back into the likes of the Crown Estate and Patterson's Estate and co. So we need more detail. All we've been told is indicative this, indicative that. And so we really have to press on and find out the detail as soon as we can, because there are other opportunities out there for us. We don't have to do what we're doing today. And actually, it's quite scary. I did the maths the other day, and I would personally be far better off. I probably wouldn't need to employ anybody. So 50 people could lose their job if I decided just to do concrete farming and carbon farming, i.e. I just let my buildings out, planted a load of woodlands, and life would be a lot more relaxed. So
the heat is on.
I will leave you with Mark Carney's words. You can read them yourself. He probably wasn't thinking of farmers and growers when he said them, but we need to adjust this new world. Otherwise, things are going to change pretty quickly without us. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. That's really amazing, and actually really tells you how we really need to move so much faster to get this sorted out, or we're going to lose our fruit and vegetable production to the detriment of all of us, really. So yeah, the heat is on. We've got about 6 minutes left, and then there's a sharp cutoff point. So I don't think it's possible we're going to get all these questions answered here, but I wonder if Sam, if you just wanted to have a little go at answering maybe by cluster some of the questions that are in the Q&A, partly just to give a little more detail about what the timelines are about how we can get some of these measures, the ones suggested by, you know, the grower, the participants in the trials, and the sort of things that Pete is suggesting need to happen. You know, when are we going to be able to fill these in, and when are we going to get rid of this 5 hectare threshold as well? That would be another good one. We can also get some typed answers to some of these Q&As if we haven't got time for more.
Jyoti, I also could, if you want, create a social group for us to continue this afterwards, but it depends on whether the panel are available to continue. Sam, for example, and Pete, would you be able to continue? Yes. Sam, would you be able to continue for another 20 minutes?
Yep, I can. Yeah, I'm around for a little bit. I have been trying to answer some of the questions in the Q&A as well, so there are a few answers up, and I'm happy to pick a couple up in the next.
Okay, I'll finish making the room then, and then we can direct people. But if you can answer 1 or 2 now, that would be great. Thanks.
That's super useful. Thank you very, very much. Yeah. Okay, go for it, Sam, and then we'll move
Okay,
on.
so thanks everyone, and thanks Pete and Rebecca for those really useful, and it's really good to get the insight. And we do listen as much as I'm sure some of you are frustrated at times. We do listen to everything you say and take it in. So, and we are working, and I think we've certainly adopted this sort of more sort of measured approach rather than sort of cutting everything off and then introducing everything. We want to try and, you know, bring things in and transition across, which then and we also want to, you know, we are really committed to sort of working with all of you to build it together. So that's not us setting out what's going to happen and then asking you whether you like it or not, or, you know, it's working with you. But that does mean that we don't always have all the answers straight away, because if we did have all the answers, we wouldn't have asked you about them. So that's you know, that is the approach that we've sort of taken, but we want to get it right and we want to flex it. So just to pick up a couple of the points that I haven't answered. The one about the time scale. So we've got 3-year agreements. That's our minimum agreement length, but obviously we're hoping this is going to be a much longer term thing. So, and the agreements will continue to roll over and continue. So we're not saying that once you've done 3 years, then that's it. You know, our plan is that they will go on, because we realize that things, you know, do take a long time, but we want to be flexible. We want people to sort of grow in confidence to bring land in as they have the opportunity, or that they feel that they can. So that's how we sort of set the minimum side, but I certainly think it will go on, and I agree that, you know, we'll need time, and we'll see these changes come in over time. I think there was a couple of questions from Christopher Stopes and somebody else, just and Jyoti mentioned about the 5 hectare. So, you know, really good point. In SFI, we don't have a minimum rule. We do have a BPS eligibility at this current stage, but that is more to do with sort of our sort of systems and infrastructure that we're working with at the moment. But in due course, if you are eligible for BPS, because sort of not forgetting that there could be land that's not eligible, or that you don't want to put in SFI, but we don't actually have a minimum amount, and we will be continuing on that. So as we get further into the transition and further into the scheme, we're going to break that link with the BPS eligibility, and that will give us a you know, a wider scope. So but if you are eligible for BPS at the moment, which I appreciate, you would then need to have had at least 5 hectares for BPS eligibility, you don't have to put all of that into the SFI. So so that is you know, so that gives an idea of the direction in which we are going. In terms of the sort of horticulture, you know, horticulture is most definitely on our radar. You know, we talk to lots of you and lots of stakeholders all the time. Certainly not bolted on the end. We've got to look at sort of how we prioritize things, how we work things, how we make things go into the scheme. You know, we're hoping that a lot of our horticultural farmers will be able to participate in some of the other standards, like the soil standards, like the land standards, the hedgerow standards, the water body buffering standards, and the agroforestry one that we're, you know, bringing. And what we want to do is also learn from that and see what additionality we can put into a horticultural standard, but we don't want to duplicate you know, the possibilities and opportunities that are already there through existing standards. And when we are you know, devising a scheme that's going to be sort of England wide and should be simple, should be an application that everybody can do, it's a complicated process, but it's not that, you know, horticulture's on the end, and it's not that we're not, you know, we're definitely you know, committed to working with all of you and getting as many of you into the scheme as we can.
So I'm going to cut in now because it's going to cut off, and that's it. But there is a community room where people can join. If you go to the community board and you click, you can get a room to talk about this more. But yeah, I just want to close this part of it to say, I can really feel the urgency here, and also and the real will on the side of Defra to try and work on this together with us. And I want to encourage any horticulture growers with us today to try and enter into as many of the pilots as possible and get involved, because the more feedback Defra can get about this, the more the schemes can be shaped. You know, get involved in our tests and trials, get involved in the SFI pilot, you know, just come to any like opportunities there are to try and shape this, because we really need it to work for everybody. Amazing.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much to all of you for enabling this session to go ahead, especially for Pete and Sam for excellent presentations, and Jyoti for putting it together.